Melissa, great to see you. We'll get started in just a sec as a few more people start rolling in. Great to see folks coming in from a couple states. That's always awesome. Lots of Los Angeles. Always love to see it. At least I do. Feels good to see folks showing up on the West Coast.
It's what we live for, Aaron.
Yes. So we'll be getting started in just a moment. And for anybody who kind of needs to go over the basics, we will be sharing more of this stuff in terms of just how to use the Q&A feature, how to kind of participate in today's event for anybody who needs that refresher. And again, in addition to letting us know where you're coming in from, let us know what your favorite supernatural creature is. Right before we started, one of the things that really blew my mind is I found out what Estes were. They are vampires, particularly female vampires that feed on Jews, which really blew my mind. That is a very niche monster. So if anybody is interested in sharing their favorite monsters, their mythological creatures, let us know, or your favorite spirit medium. For those that are interested or have followed along that kind of movement from the Victorian era to the modern day. Awesome. Glad to see folks. Yes, Estries. Thank you, Avi. And wow, somebody joining from Germany. Thank you so much. Oh no, calling in from Los Angeles. Awesome. Cool. Thanks to everybody for participating today. So we'll be getting started in just a moment. And as you're coming in again, just feel free to introduce yourselves, let us know where you're coming in from, and let us know who your favorite supernatural creature is. Because I have to get in my 2 seconds of hating on Twilight, I will say no glittering Twilight vampires, but anything else counts. And again, that's just me being mean. You can also be really specific about your kind of mean vampire or mean monster love. It could be a George Romero slow walking vampire, or sorry, zombie or something that moves quickly. Awesome.
You
Cool.
can
So
just
I
a
think,
good old-fashioned Ouija board.
yeah, awesome. So I think we're going to go ahead and get started. And so I'll just say again, good afternoon, good evening to everybody joining. I'm Aaron Castillo-White, Executive Director of Culture Mercado, and it's my pleasure to welcome you to tonight's program that I'm really excited about, Demons, Dybbuks, and Mediums in Early 20th Century Jewish Warsaw. We're so glad that you're here with us, whether you're joining out of scholarly interest or cultural curiosity, or just a deep appreciation for the mysterious threads that run through Jewish history and folklore. Tonight's event is proudly hosted by Culture Mercado and co-sponsored by two amazing partner organizations, Der Nister, based in downtown Los Angeles, and the Southern California Abitering Educational Center. We're lucky to be joined by Rabbi Zach Golden from Der Nister and Ruth Judkowitz, who's representing the Southern California Abitering Educational Center. If you have questions for them, feel free to put that in the chat. And now it's a great and real honor to introduce our speaker, Samuel Glauber. He's a respected historian whose research bridges the mystical and the modern. Sam is currently pursuing a PhD from Ben-Gurion University of the Negev, where his research developing an interdisciplinary approach to processes of religious and social change with a focus on mass media and popular culture continues to inspire and delight. He's presented talks at many institutions, among them the Yiddish Book Center, the Committee for Yiddish, and others, and I really recommend checking out some of his other talks. They are incredible. And his work actively plumbs the depths of spiritualism, the occult, in a way that bridges modern fascination with arcane or previous thought. So please join me in welcoming Professor Glauber. And as he starts, I'll go ahead and put some stuff in the chat for folks, just so you know that you can ask questions at any time and feel free to engage with us in the chat. Thank you so much. Sam.
Thank you, Aaron, for your kind words of introduction, and for the opportunity to speak with everyone here tonight. It's a great honor to be part of Culture Mercado's ongoing series on Yiddish witchcraft, mysticism, and the occult, and I'm very excited to be here with all of you. So what I want to do tonight is offer a detailed look at a topic that's very dear to my heart, Jewish occultism in Eastern Europe. As Aaron mentioned, this is the subject of my PhD dissertation. Specifically, we're going to look at a particular incident from 1914 in Warsaw that will bring to light the world of demons, seances, and spirit possession in Jewish Eastern Europe. Uh, Through the story of these events, we will learn about traditional notions of demons and Dybbuks, but also about how these traditional beliefs were transformed by the encounter with modern occultism, in particular the concept of mediumism. More than just an object of fascination, for Jews in early 20th century Eastern Europe, the disputed existence of demons, Dybbuks, and mediums raised questions about Jewish cultural identity, bodily autonomy, and the place of the unseen and the mysterious within modern Jewish life. So let's dive right in. I want to begin by taking us to Warsaw on the night of March 3rd, 1914. That night, thousands of people packed into the courtyard at 35 Nalewki Street in the beating heart of Jewish Warsaw to witness the public exorcism of a Dybbuk, a possessing spirit, from the body of a young woman. The Dybbuk, however, failed to appear, and after a long wait, the disappointed crowd dispersed and went home. Down the street at Nalewki 38, close to 100,000 copies of the Yiddish newspaper Der Moment, one of Warsaw's leading Yiddish papers, had been printed that morning and sent off for distribution across the Russian Empire. On page 5 of that same day's newspaper, readers could find a detailed account of a seance that several distinguished members of Warsaw high society had held earlier that week with a local Jewish girl named Zipporah Kuska. Kuska was celebrated in the press as the so-called water medium, and at 10 years old, she had come to the attention of Polish spiritualists following an earlier report in Der Moment from several weeks before, claiming that demons lived in the apartment on Bonifacierska Street in Warsaw, where she worked as a maidservant. The apartment suffered from a mysterious leak of water, and while its Jewish inhabitants attributed the flooding to the presence of demons, the spiritualists, or occultists as they referred to in the Yiddish press, identified Kuska as a medium who was unwittingly responsible for the disturbances. So for much of early 1914, Warsaw's Jewish residents were spellbound by demons, Dybbuks, and mediums. What started as a single news report about an isolated haunting rapidly transformed into a full-blown media spectacle, with close to 40 articles on the topics appearing in the city's Yiddish press in the span of just 6 weeks. Possession was suddenly on everyone's mind. Crowds gathered to catch sight of demons and Dybbuks. Critics attacked Der Moment for fueling a resurgence of, quote, darkness and superstition. Writers published essays inspired by the goings-on, and a hastily produced film of Kuska demonstrating her medium powers on camera was screened in theaters across Warsaw. The craze was ultimately short-lived. Attention spans in Warsaw, much as in other turn-of-the-centuries cities, were fleeting, and by the middle of March, the local Yiddish press had moved on to the next story. By that time, by late March, as the Kuska and the demons receded from the public eye, they left behind far more questions than answers. Yet the questions that were raised by the sudden appearance in Warsaw of demons, Dybbuks, and mediums in February 1914 can tell us a great deal about conceptions of possession in the body among the Jews of Warsaw in the early 20th century and the contribution of modern occultism to their formation. So Warsaw in 1914 was a true Jewish metropolis, a city teeming with over 275,000 Jewish residents. So crowds were a key feature of urban modernity, and Warsaw was no exception. Jews gathered in theaters and coffee houses, but also in the city's courtyards and crowded and bustling streets. They gathered to protest, they gathered to pray, and they gathered to experience Jewish collectivity, but also to be entertained and to take part in urban spectacles, such as the failed Dybbuk exorcism on Nalewki Street, with which I opened just a few moments ago. These crowds were guided and pulled together by a key institution of the new Jewish public sphere, the Yiddish newspaper. The Warsaw Yiddish Daily Press developed quickly from its origins in 1905, and by 1914, 3 Yiddish newspapers appeared in the city every day, aside from Shabbos, alongside countless weekly magazines and a competing Jewish daily press in Hebrew and Polish. Warsaw's Yiddish newspapers, which reached by far the biggest segment of the city's Jewish population, served as guides to life in the big city. They directed readers towards certain sites and steered them away from others. This press market was very quickly saturated, which set off a fierce competition between the rival newspapers, above all Heint and Der Moment, which were the city's leading Yiddish dailies. Both Heint and Der Moment were always searching for sensational stories that would sell copies, even as each accused the other of corrupting readers with lurid news. So these conditions, an urban Jewish collective eager for entertainment and a combative Yiddish press, always in need of a good story, came to a head in early February 1914 when a young man walked into the offices of Der Moment to report that his apartment on Bonifatirsky Street was haunted by demons, setting off a possession craze that would consume the city for the weeks to come. So just to zoom out, demons and Dybbuks held a fairly tenuous position in Jewish Eastern Europe at the turn of the century. While demons and the like had long been present in Jewish culture and folklore, voices began to be heard in the mid-18th century that questioned their existence. With the rise of the Haskalah, the Jewish Enlightenment in Eastern Europe, and its calls for the modernization of Jewish society, belief in demons and Dybbuks came under fierce attack from Maskilim, the Enlighteners, for whom the non-existence of demons was axiomatic. The efforts of the Maskilim to eradicate belief in demons met with mixed success. So you can certainly find some rabbis who were willing to admit that while demons, while certainly real, appeared to have recently disappeared, reports of demons and Dybbuks continue to enjoy widespread credence in traditional circles in Eastern Europe well into the interwar period. Yet if Jewish enlighteners equated Jewish modernity with the abandonment of belief in demons, that is, to be modern is to not believe in demons, the widespread interest sparked by the claimed appearance of demons and Dybbuks in Warsaw in 1914 complicates this picture quite a bit. What we end up with instead is a far more nuanced narrative of Jewish modernity, one in which a fascination with demons and Dybbuks coexisted with modern urban life. So let's turn to the Jews of Warsaw. Warsaw's Jewish residents held a complex range of attitudes towards possession. And I'm using the term possession broadly because it referred to both possession by demons, a demonic entity, but also by spirits of the deceased. But even as members of the public gathered in 1914 to observe the demons and Dybbuks that were said to dwell in their midst, many of them remained skeptical. To give an example, Der Moment did the most to stir up demon mania among readers of the Yiddish press, yet its own reports cast doubts upon the truth of what they were claiming. This heterogeneity of truth invited readers to explore the possibility, to entertain the possibility of exploring hidden realities, while also allowing each person to reach their own conclusions. So what began as a story about demons took several turns without ever arriving at a clear resolution. Throughout the story, different sets of actors offered their own interpretations of the phenomena in question, each of which were reflected and turned back to readers of the Yiddish press. Despite these ambiguities, we can reconstruct a trajectory leading from a discourse centered around demonic possession to a discourse centered around the concept of mediumism. So let's unpack this. The initial reports in Der Moment regarding the hauntings on Bonifatirsky Street can be traced back to a concern with demons in Jewish history, in Jewish culture that dates back to late antiquity, over 2,000 years. So although understood differently at various times and places and called by many different names and terms, demons can be found in the Talmud, Jewish magical and Kabbalistic literature, the works of medieval and early modern Ashkenazi pietists, the folk literature and practices of both Ashkenazi and Middle Eastern and North African Jewish communities, and in modern Jewish literature. So there are some common threads to the demons in all these different places. In the Jewish imagination, demons were on the whole understood to be malevolent, not your friend. Sometimes they were invisible, you couldn't see them. Sometimes, this is even more concerning, they were nearly indistinguishable from regular people, sometimes even serving as marriage partners. Demons were very well represented in the traditional folkways of Eastern European Jewry, where they're referred to by a number of names. In Yiddish, you could speak of Shedim of Ruches, Mazikim, Mashchisim, Leitzim, Machablim, and Nishkuta, all of which, except for the latter, are Hebrew loanwords. Demons were commonly believed to inhabit natural areas, forests, fields, etc., as well as the margins of human habitation, like cellars, and a very rich array of practices for managing their presence, particularly within the home, developed over the generations. Demons also turn up as characters in Jewish folklore, whether in Hebrew or in Yiddish, dating back to the medieval period. So, alongside demons, a distinct concept of spirit possession arose in the 16th century, centered around the Dybbuk. The Dybbuk was the possessive spirit of a deceased individual who had committed some sort of sin during their lifetime, and after their deaths, needed to re-enter the body of a living person in search of rectification. So, while Jewish demonology, a concept of demons, predates the phenomenon of Dybbuk by over 1,000 years, by the 17th and 18th century, the two concepts came to coexist in the Jewish folk imagination, despite the differences between them. As a literary genre, stories about possession, either by demon or by Dybbuk, were often styled as a Hebrew as a masenora, in Yiddish as a maisenora, in English a terrible tale. In the majority of these stories, the possessive spirit or demon is exorcised by a rabbi, and the story often concludes with some sort of moralistic message. These so-called terrible tales, the Maisa Noira, underwent a revival of sorts in the late 19th and early 20th centuries, with over a dozen new editions of these stories published in Eastern Europe at the time, both as standalone works and within collections of Hasidic hagiography. With the establishment of a Yiddish daily press in Eastern Europe, the traditional Maisenora underwent a further transformation. Possession accounts, now stripped of their moralizing elements, could be found on alongside the back page news, with reports on muggings, new construction, other local happenings, also a demon. Depending on the newspaper and its particular agenda, these reports might express mocking bemusement and even open critique in response to the public's claims of demonic possession, while other articles written in the style of human interest stories presented the unfolding drama without passing judgment. Just to give one example, over the course of 10 months in 1908, the newspaper Unser Leben, a predecessor of Der Moment, published regular updates about an alleged haunting of an apartment on Pavia Street in Warsaw, and the subsequent libel suit brought by the apartment's tenant against Nowa Gazeta, the city's Polish-language Jewish newspaper, after Nowa Gazeta accused the tenant of making up the story in order to prematurely break his lease, which might be relatable content for some people. Even as people continue to enjoy reading stories about demons and Dybbuks, as late as 1914, these traditional models of possession had become increasingly disputed in public discourse in Eastern Europe. Meaning people enjoyed reading about them, but to actually believe in them, that might be a little bit more controversial. This was part of the broader trend of modernization that reached Jews in Eastern Europe from the mid-19th century onwards. The gradual breakdown of traditional Jewish society in Eastern Europe, spurred in part by political, socioeconomic, and intellectual developments, brought with it new modes of scientific thinking that didn't always square well with spiritual entities. And belief in demons and Dybbuks was particularly stigmatized. A rationalist modernity spread rapidly among disaffected Jewish youth in Eastern Europe who formed a new intellectual class. The German sociologist Max Weber famously described this process as the disenchantment of the world, a shift in mentality from a worldview governed by, quote, mysterious, incalculable forces to one quoted by technical means and calculation. Yet demons and Dybbuks did not disappear entirely. Within traditionalist circles, in particular in Hasidic communities, demons and Dybbuks remained as actual as ever before. Yet even among non-traditional Jews, this was far more complex than a simple abandonment of belief in possession. Disenchantment, as theorized by Weber, was not so much a fact as a prognosis, what he took to be, quote, the fate of our times, in light of the growing rationalization that characterized the modern world. To put it differently, disenchantment was an expected mentality, a way of viewing things, but one that did not always accord with the reality on the ground. To return to Eastern Europe, many self-consciously modern Jews weren't quite sure what to think when it came to demons and Dybbuks. They knew that according to prevailing intellectual norms, they weren't supposed to believe that they exist. Yet many remained fascinated by the possibility of encountering them. So, reading the initial report in Der Moment from early February 1914 that set off this whole broader public spectacle, we learn that the young man who came to the newspaper for help with his demons that haunted his apartment confessed to the reporter that, quote, truth be told, he does not himself believe that demons can be found in his. He himself does not believe that demons exist. Yet he also could not deny the reality of an undetermined something, a mysterious something, pouring water on his floorboards, which left him feeling unsettled. So at this stage, confronted with a mysterious disturbance, demonic possession remained the default explanation among the inhabitants of the apartment, any professed unbelief notwithstanding. An atmosphere of fascination and ambivalence settled over Bonifaterska Street as word of the haunting spread across Warsaw. A steady stream of visitors forced their way into the residence to search for demons, while hundreds gathered on the street below, blocked by the police from entering the building. The story was quickly picked up by the local Polish press, and non-Jews joined the spectacle as well. Jews and Christians, men and women, wealthy merchants and young hooligans, who were all drawn in by the unbelievable but true story playing out in their midst, briefly transformed the cramped two-room apartment into a site of encounter between Warsaw's diverse populations. Reporting nearly every day from the apartment, Der Moment published a series of sensational articles that transported those who could not make it themselves into the middle of the spectacle. One neighbor called for a rabbi to be summoned, claiming that a Gilgul, a reincarnated soul, was trapped under the floorboard. Others recalled two former occupants of the apartment, children, who had died there under tragic circumstances. Yet if the newspaper sensationalized, it was also ambivalent about the truth of anything it was describing in its pages. While readers were encouraged to, quote, go one more time to Bonifaterska Street and hope for demons, each report was signed off by the pen name Nit Cane Shade, not a demon. Many of those who visited the apartment shared this ambivalence. They hoped either to catch sight of the demons themselves or uncover the human trickery that produced the water. These spectators who were caught between being skeptical and believing, quote, sat there for hours in order to reach a conclusion and catch the demon or the man-demon. Be what they may be, demons remained alive if embattled in the public imagination. If the thousands who crowded into the courtyard at 35 Milewski Street several weeks later are any indication, Dybbuks were also live as well. So the question of the demons appeared settled by February 11th, 1914, a week after the initial report appeared in Der Moment. The Warsaw City Police, who were summoned on February 10th to disperse the unruly crowds who were gathered on the street below, produced a detailed protocol of the alleged haunting based on the testimony of all those present. Unfortunately, I have not found this in the archives, and ordered an investigation by the Municipal Building Commission. The commission arrived the next day. They lifted up the floorboards, they tore everything down, and failing to obtain any evidence of demons being present in the apartment, declared the entire thing to be a hoax. 2 weeks later, however, a brief news piece appeared in Der Moment under the headline, quote, a medium or demons, that informed readers that, quote, the story of the demons on Bonifaterska Street has taken a new turn. Among the Polish Christian visitors to the apartment, it turns out, were several physicians who were occultists who took a keen interest in mysterious phenomena, believing that these offered a window into hidden dimensions of reality. these occultist spiritualist physicians, they accepted the veracity of the claims made by the apartment's residents that there was water appearing mysteriously, but they rejected their explanation of demons. In place of demons, they offered a new explanation. They singled out an occupant of the apartment, the 10-year-old Jewish servant girl Tzipora Kuska, as being responsible for all the disturbances. The girl, they declared, was a psychic medium in possession of the rare ability to materialize and dematerialize water. This determination would have significant ramifications for how possession was conceptualized in Jewish public discourse in the weeks to come. So the appearance of demons on Bonifatius Street was more than just an isolated haunting. These demons appeared, or allegedly appeared, right as modern occult currents were beginning to gain a foothold among Jews and Poles in Eastern Europe. Just to give a word about the occult, modern occultism emerged in the mid-19th century as a loose collection of beliefs and practices concerned with hidden dimensions of reality, which were often articulated in scientific language. Prominent among these occult currents were spiritualism, the spiritualist movement, a modern movement centered around the belief that the dead survive in spirit form and can be contacted by the living, typically at a seance, and psychical research or parapsychology, a controversial scientific or pseudoscientific, depends who you ask, discipline concerned with the investigation of occult or supernatural phenomena, which were here reconstituted as manifestations of hitherto unknown psychic forces. At the center of both currents of spiritualism and of parapsychology stood the figure of the medium. The medium was an individual, oftentimes a woman, who is widely believed to possess the ability to communicate with spirits or to access unconscious and unexplored mental states. For those who believed in it, mediumism served as an access point to invisible realities, be they spiritual or psychical. At a time when many began to lose faith in traditional notions of possession, occultism offered a new model by which to conceptualize the disturbances on Bonifatiuska Street, a model that was ostensibly in line with modern science. And just to drive home the distinction here between the spiritualist concept of the medium and psychical research, for the spiritualists, the medium has some sort of either innate or developed ability to communicate with spirits of the dead, with sort of a metaphysical entity, while for the parapsychologist, the same phenomenon is described not necessarily in the language of spirits, but in the language of some sort of not yet recognized scientific force that could be measured and quantified and described, etc. But I should mention that both spiritualism and psychical research found adherents among many leading scientists and intellectuals across Europe and North America, and their authority lent much credence to these movements. So the involvement of these Polish occultists in the case of the demons on Bonifatiuska Street had the unintended effect of bringing occultism and mediumism in particular to the attention of the broader Jewish public. So among Warsaw's Jewish residents, the discovery that there was a medium living in their midst they didn't even know was a source of great excitement, even if not everyone knew exactly what a medium was. As word spread following the news reports in Der Moment that there was in fact a medium in town, a great crowd gathered once more at Bonifatiuska Street, as they had several weeks prior, in hopes of beholding wonders. So again, this is several weeks after people came to see the demons. Now they're back to see the medium. According to the newspaper, the building's courtyards, as well as the surrounding street, were packed with people, and the police were once again summoned to disperse the crowd. What's worth mentioning was that Kuska, who is now being written about in the press as the water medium, had already left the premises. She didn't live there anymore. So all the spectators were left to pass the time with, quote, exaggerated stories about the miracles performed by the medium and her supernatural, incomprehensible powers. That's the words of the Yiddish press. So if for those in the crowd, mediumism remained a mystery and like demons was marked as supernatural, the subsequent coverage from Der Moment sought to educate readers about mediumism and distinguish it from traditional understandings of possession. So in a series of articles published over the following weeks in late February, early March 1914, Der Moment brought readers to the seance table alongside Kuska and presented readers with a basic history of spiritualism, psychical research, and their rival conceptions of mediumism. So these articles, which were along with others published over the course of the affair, constructed an image of mediumism that was really strikingly at odds, very different than the earlier depictions of demonic possession. So looking at the earlier articles, the demons on Bonifatirski Street, for all that they attracted crowds excited to see them, were actually a source of great terror for the people who lived in the apartment. The woman of the house was said to, quote, fear her own shadow. Her neighbors were always, they're described as anxiously inquiring about the mysterious water. But Kuska, the child medium, by contrast, was a source of great delight and excitement for the upper class Polish occultists who met her. She was treated with adoration, showered with gifts and other creature comforts. And if the residents of Bonifatirska Street made efforts to expel the demons from the apartment and not encounter them anymore, the Polish occultists actually pressured Kuska to try to manifest her powers and be more visible, more present. And the differences don't end there. Demons and Dybbuks were understood to be external possessive entities that invade the human space or the human body, while mediumism was a latent quality that was inherently found within certain human beings, and then manifest outwards. And perhaps most importantly, the demons were widely understood. Demons and spirits were widely understood to be supernatural, to be outside of the natural order. The Polish press described the haunting one place as a supernatural phenomenon, yet mediumism, when it's described by Der Moment, is described as die Lehre von geheime übermenschliche Naturkräfte, the doctrine of hidden superhuman natural forces. So by casting the supposed haunting as the product of mediumism rather than demonic possession, the Polish occultists, and in their wake, Der Moment, decoupled the disturbances on Bonifatirska Street from the traditional metaphysical order in favor of a new explanation situated within the conceptual world of modern science. That is to say, they don't deny that something's what was being claimed as they don't deny that what was being recognized as demons wasn't real, simply that people misunderstood what was going on. They weren't encountering demons. It was in fact something that could be scientifically explained as psychic mediumism, which of course for those at the time was a completely compelling scientific explanation, even if today not everyone would necessarily accept that. So rather than the workings of external malevolent forces, the mysterious water could also be described as originating within the body, specifically that of Kuska. So now in the time that remains, I want to take a few minutes just to talk about Zipporah Kuska herself, the child medium at the center of our story today, and her experiences. Kuska, to put it simply, is a very elusive figure. We don't know much about her. She disappears from the historical record nearly as suddenly as she enters it, and the little that we do know about her is derived exclusively from the press coverage of her short-lived stardom as a medium. As a maidservant, she belonged to a marginalized group within Jewish society in Eastern Europe. Her brief fame as a medium led her into the aristocratic salons of Warsaw, yet it's not clear if this had any lasting effect on her subaltern status. While her voice is largely lost to history, an examination of her appearances in the Warsaw daily press can shed light on her experience, as well as the tenuous opportunities that mediumism offered Jewish women in Eastern Europe. Indeed, there were many Jewish women in Eastern Europe who worked as mediums in the early 20th century, yet we have very few accounts of their activities. So the protocols of the seances that Kuska held with members of the Warsaw Polish, the Christian intelligentsia, which were published in Der Moment at the beginning of March 1914, they provide a window, however small, into the experiences of Jewish women mediums in early 20th century Warsaw. So just a word again about Kuska, like the vast majority of Jewish maidservants in Eastern Europe, was born into poverty. And in fact, being employed as a maidservant, even in the age as young as 10, was a common means of poverty relief for young Jewish women. These girls and women were highly vulnerable to abuse, in particular the sexual advances of men in their households, and they had very little recourse in the event of unwanted pregnancies. Female domestic workers were often viewed by their employers with great suspicion, and they were stigmatized in various ways. In the late Tsarist Empire, one particular stigma associated with maidservants was that they were closely linked with domestic hauntings. So reports of haunted houses printed in Russian media often attribute the supernatural events to the presence of a maidservant in the house. The maidservant was often portrayed as an unwitting conduit for demonic forces that sought to wreak havoc on the very household the maidservant was tasked with maintaining. So when word of the demons on Bonaventurska Street reached the Polish occultists of Warsaw, it was natural then that they would look to the home's maidservant for answers. So Kuska first came to public attention in a report published on February 24th, 1914, in the Warsaw Polish non-Jewish newspaper Kurier Porani. Although her name does not appear in the press for several days, where she's referred to in the Polish press as Paula Kuska. That's her name in Polish, apparently. Her age is given in different accounts as 7, 9, 10, and 12 years old, although 10 is the most common. And she's described alternatively as calm, melancholy for her age, clever, quote, very childlike, and, quote, a well-developed and pleasant child. And the Polish press reports also include further details, namely the quote, she was a bright blonde, her type, after all, being rather Aryan. Interesting detail. As she only spoke rudimentary Polish, her father, who came with her to the seances, served as her translator. He was a carpenter. The Warsaw occultist physicians who identified Kuska at first held a seance with her in the Bonaventurska Street apartment where she worked, and satisfied with the results, they presented her in late February before the Warsaw Psychological Society. Kuska, who was at this point had gotten used to serving as a medium, insisted, much to the chagrin of the assembled members of the society, that she could only demonstrate her abilities if she was seated at a seance table. However, her request for a table was denied, and water failed to appear. A further set of seances, which is the main source for the protocols that we have, were held in the following days under the guidance of the Polish actor Kazimierz Kaminski. Detailed protocols from these seances, published in Der Moment from March 2nd to March 5th, provide a vivid picture of Kuska's mediumship. We learn, for instance, that Kuska was seated around a table with 4 other spiritualists where, apparently lit only by the faint glow of phosphorus, they linked hands. Afterwards, she was moved to a wide upholstered chair where Kaminski hypnotized her. Evidently, she was also very easily hypnotized. Under his influence, she directed those present to search for water under the seance table. And according to the protocol, 10 droplets of water were found, much to the excitement of everyone present. At a following seance held in the company of Princess Maria Lubomyrska, a very prominent Polish aristocrat whose husband was actually the mayor of Warsaw for a number of years and was one of the draftees of the Polish Declaration of Independence. So a seance held with her, along with a, quote, large number of ladies and gentlemen of the wealthy Polish intelligentsia, Kuska successfully identified a covertly marked silver goblet. She was quite successful. Mediumism granted many women access to power and authority. However, as a child medium, the question of Kuzka's agency is rather complicated. From the onset, we read that the physicians who discovered her would be holding consultations among themselves in order to determine, quote, what exactly to do with the girl. While they ascribed to her great powers, they were quick to add that she possessed these powers, quote, unbeknownst to herself. She was taken from apartment to apartment and repeatedly pressured by her handlers to perform. Yet Kuzka was not always interested in performing. While she's recorded as responding in the affirmative when asked if she liked being a medium, the seance protocols are riddled with attempts to ploy her with toys. They're constantly giving her toys and candy, quote, in order to concentrate her childlike thoughts, although these efforts were only met with partial success. Indeed, it was in her, I would say, quite age-appropriate childish behavior that her agency was most manifest. At one point, she was asked to continue a seance past her bedtime, and she quite literally threw a tantrum. I will now read my translation of a press report. This is from the protocols. It says, everyone showed the child the greatest affection, but the little girl was already so exhausted from the earlier seances that she could hardly answer a word. The child stands up, makes a serious face, and considering once more what they ordered her to do, she answers indifferently that, quote, today she's already very tired. Her head hurts terribly. Tomorrow she'll certainly do it. Everyone present resorted again to plying her with various toys and candy. And after a short while, they asked the child once more if she could proceed with the seance. But the child replied firmly, I am not doing anything today. End of quote. So, confronted with an uncooperative child, Kaminsky was forced to grant her wish and delay the seance until the next day. For all their power, the physicians, aristocrats, and intelligentsia who were gathered to examine Kuzka were ultimately dependent upon her goodwill. Mediumship catapulted Kuzka from domestic employment to the highest spheres of Polish society in Warsaw, yet from what we read, she seemed to have been largely indifferent to her newfound plush surroundings. However, mediumship offered more than just temporary material comforts. It also granted her a charismatic authority among her fellow Jews. The Yiddish press reports tell us that the apartment on Bonifacierska Street where she previously worked was inundated by down-on-their-luck petitioners who sought out her blessings and assistance in overcoming a wide range of personal and financial misfortunes, much as they would have gone to a Hasidic rabbi or other known miracle worker. These reports, while tantalizing, are very fragmentary and don't tell us if she actually received any of these visitors. Given the lack of information, we simply do not know how Kuzka responded to her situation. That same week, on March 4th, Kuzka's celebrity spread to yet another medium, the silver screen. A movie which unfortunately is now lost, of Kuzka demonstrating her mediumistic powers, debuted at the Trianon Theater in Warsaw. The film, which was titled Pola Kuzka, the Medium from Bonifacierska Street, was put out by the Jewish-owned film company Cosmo Film. It's unclear to what degree Kuzka actually consented to be filmed, and members of her family at one point actually informed the press that she was not even in the movie and that it was a paid actor who had been hired to play her, although this claim was later retracted, saying, in fact, it was Kuzka. Whatever the case, Kuzka vanishes from the daily press following the film's release, and we never hear about her again. To conclude then, that mediumism offered some women a path out of poverty, but this was a highly tenuous social mobility that depended on the continued success of their performance. So Kuzka was identified by others as a medium, and it seems that she perhaps struggled to learn to play the role, and she slipped back into obscurity, and her ultimate fate remains unknown. So I just want to draw to a close by summing up what we've learned tonight. For close to 2 months, in February and March 1914, thousands of Warsaw's Jewish residents gathered together en masse to catch sight of demons, Dybbuks, and mediums, all said to be living in their midst. This urban spectacle was driven and constructed by different sets of actors who all had competing agendas. Beginning with the initial rumors of demons on Bonifaciuszka Street, the Yiddish press, in particular Der Moment, printed dramatic coverage that fueled the spectacle while allowing those who were far away to join in from a distance by reading. This was not seen favorably by all. Critics, particularly from the newspaper Heint, castigated Der Moment for fomenting superstition. The involvement of Polish occultists in the meantime led to the introduction of mediumism to readers of the Yiddish press. As demonstrated by the Jewish child medium Zipporah Kuska, mediumism offered a natural understanding of possession that promised access to latent powers of the mind. In particular, mediumism's scientific vibe, as you could say, appealed to people who were perhaps alienated from traditional notions of demonology, yet nevertheless remained intrigued by the possibility of possession being real. They're found sort of on the edge. This fascination with demons, Dybbuks, and mediums illustrates the abiding power of possession within the urban modernity of Warsaw, a power amplified by its convergence with modern occultism. To be sure, beliefs in demons and Dybbuks remained highly controversial in many circles in early 20th century Jewish Eastern Europe. Yet for all the skepticism, reports of their disappearance were premature. Thank you very much.
Awesome. Thank you so much for that presentation. That's fascinating. And, I think it's really wonderful to just have you here. Before we get started, because I know I have a million questions, there were a couple of things that just came up in the chat. One was a quick question of how to spell her name. I think there's some inquiry and some folks want to do some deeper research there.
Sure. So I'll write out in the chat. In the Polish press, it's always like this, and then in Yiddish, her name appears as. Look it up. That's how her name appears in Yiddish. Yeah.
Some very cool. Thank you. And getting into some of the questions that have been asked by the community, I think we have some really incredible and intense chats or questions. The one that I'm going to start with is just going kind of in order here is there an agency distinction between possession and mediumship? Were mediums considered responsible or culpable for the demonic, supernatural, or other presences?
That's a great question. I mean, and it's hard to give a single answer because obviously there's a lot of different conceptions and different nuances. So in the cases of possession, often women were accused of being possessed or understood as being possessed. This often led to them being, I'm now obviously intentionally using the term, but often led to them being demonized by people in their society. A famous example, obviously, is like something like thinking of the early modern witch trials as sort of a good parallel. And in any case, sort of the objective of the community was to try to expel demons or to expel the possessing spirits. However, there are a lot of cases of women, particularly women in Sfat in the 16th century, who were possessed by spirits and were able to sort of access a degree of authority that they wouldn't otherwise have had. When these women were possessed by spirits, they were speaking in the voice of the spirit. They were able to be critical of rabbinic figures in their society and otherwise speak out in a way that they weren't otherwise able to. So in certain cases, even just a classical case of possession actually did provide those possessed with a degree of power they otherwise didn't have, and it wasn't always something, that would lead to them being marginalized. And in the case of mediumism, there's somewhat of a inversion in that when constituted as mediumism, being a medium is something seen very positively, at least by those within the community of believers of spiritualism or parapsychology. That someone who's a medium is, in a certain sense, is blessed with a certain ability to be in touch with spirits or to be able to uh, manipulate these psychic forces that, in the words of the parapsychologist, scientists were only beginning to understand. So I hope that helped answer a little bit.
We have a second question from the community, but you somewhat got to in the sense of there are all these prohibitions against necromancy and that those sorts of things. The and some people considered it part of it was there was no contradiction, but the focal question here is did any Jews or whichever Jews consider this to be avodah zarah and a problem outside of even those strict prohibitions, but rather just in just a completely foreign direction entirely.
Yeah, I mean it's interesting because there's a classic tension in that it says very just to hone in on an example of spirit communication, because that's something where there's it's very blatant. It says very explicitly in the Torah, it says very explicitly in the Bible, don't communicate with the dead. Don't inquire of the dead. And you have incidents, the famous story of King Saul in the book of Samuel, which he consults with this the necromancer Balat Ov of Endor, and then is punished for that, although it does work. In the story. So you have within the biblical text, there's very clear prohibition against it. Yet when it comes to rabbinic literature, from around, from the late antiquity, you have first of all many accounts of rabbis appearing to communicate with spirits, and then you also have legal intricacies, sort of juggling to try to try to justify what's going on. So you have the rabbis of the Talmud saying that when the Torah says that it's prohibited to talk to the dead, that refers to talking to the dead in a cemetery. But outside of a cemetery, it's okay. Or they do all sorts of things like that to try to basically limit the extent of the prohibition, basically in order to exonerate what was clearly a widespread practice of spirit communication. And this continues. You have the exact same thing happens in the 19th and early 20th century with the modern spiritualist movement. It was particularly the case in less in Eastern Europe and more in England. In England, you have a number of spiritualism in England was very organized. There are lots of societies and organizations, associations, and you had a number of Jewish spiritualist groups that developed, and a number of rabbis, even Orthodox rabbis, who take part in this. And when questioned about it, they'll say, this is scientific research. The Torah does not prohibit scientific research, although they'll say the Torah only prohibits spirit communication as a form of idolatry. But what we're doing is, again, is research. So therefore, nothing wrong. Nothing that
If I recall correctly, I mean Yosef Karo himself had the spirit of the Mishnah. He was a medium of sorts in his own way.
correct. He was engaged with the phenomenon he had what was called a magid, which was sort of like the positive inverse of the Dybbuk, you could say.
Wow. No, thank you for that. I think that was great. One of the questions, I'm just going to read this directly. I think this is an incredible one. Is in his book Gewinne Mulbursche, former Moment editor Burl Kutcher describes a sensationalist Dybbuk investigation in the 1920s that involved both the Jewish and Polish press and a Polish constable who vowed to get to the bottom of a nightly midnight courtyard disturbance. Yiddish writers S. Ansky and Shlomo Gilbert both figure in this anecdote. The Dybbuk turned out to be an old woman who suffered from dementia, who enjoyed flinging pottery from an upstairs apartment window. And are there other instances where the Yiddish and non-Jewish press and or Polish law enforcement collaborate or share in that hysteria of some Jewish occult sensation or other? Or was the Jewish occult sensationalism mostly self-contained?
So thank you for David for bringing that up. I discovered this passage in Kucher's memoirs relatively recently when I was reading Gerald Marcus's great English translation. And I thought it was great. This whole passage is great. There's Kucher, who was a long-term reporter for Heint, basically describes being up at night investigating a case almost identical to the one described in the story, but it's by the one I described today. But it clearly took place at a different time. It was clearly a few years later with different people, which just goes to show that this sort of thing was not a one-time incident. This sort of thing happened fairly often. I mentioned earlier, I found an account from 1908. I found at least five or six different times where this happened, where there was some sort of account of demons in Warsaw. And then the reporters would converge to try to get their story, and the police would be involved. And even what I described tonight, there was involvement of the police. I mentioned at one point that the police show up and disperse the crowd, and then they declare the whole thing to be a hoax. I mean, there was some involvement of the police. And so for those interested, the English translation of Kucher's memoirs, which is translated as I think it was Once There Was Warsaw, um, provides a great sort of insider account of what it was like to be in a to what it was like to spend the night in an apartment that was allegedly haunted by demons.
That's fantastic. And I think the last question before we kind of get to what we have left in our time is a great one. One of the questions is there a discernible connection to the rise of psychoanalysis at the same time? And I think just for fun context, after just rereading the Freud's wonderful autobiography, which is actually very silly for those who read it, where he kind of starts off by talking about hypnotism and saying hypnotism was great. He explored it as far as it could be explored, and then he developed a better practice and just throws it away and moves on. And you see some of that in psychology or early psychology as the practice develops and as the field develops. But I think that's a great question. So again, is there a discernible connection to the rise of psychoanalysis at the same time?
So I'll just open by saying I always get asked this question. Um, And I myself am not an expert on psychoanalysis, but they obviously do arise out of the same uh, ge general concern with investigating both um, hidden realities in general and also hidden aspects of of the human being. There's a direct connection between in general, there's a direct connection between the rise of psychology in general and an earlier occult practice known as mesmerism, which was a precursor of hypnosis. And mesmerism itself, which is very similar to hypnosis, but there's an idea that it's called animal magnetism that you can that there's this invisible fluid in the world, and if you manipulate it correctly, you can cause a person to enter into an altered state of consciousness where they're clairvoyant and possibly also heal illness. And that's a concept which has its origins in earlier esoteric theories. So this concept of mesmerism there was a historian of psychology and psychoanalysis, Henri Ellenberger, who famously claimed a direct link between mesmerism and subsequent schools of dynamic psychiatry. And then in the specific case of psychoanalysis, you have this complicated relationship between Freud and the occult going around him. For those interested, there's a book called The Myth of Disenchantment by a scholar named Josephson Storm, in which he has a whole chapter about sort of occult connections between Freud's theories and what was going on around him. And just to give a better example, a more explicit example, but obviously I'll mention that Freud had somewhat of a complicated relationship with it. He had at certain points he writes that how he believes in telepathy, but he doesn't want to talk about it. Much like his Jewishness, he says. But if you look at Jung, in Jung, it's much more on the surface because he wrote his PhD, his doctoral, his PhD was actually written about was a study of a spirit medium. Rather than what I'm doing, writing, I'm writing a distance of 100 years, he could actually go and meet a medium and write about her, and that was his PhD, which sounds like more fun. So in the case of Jung, you have a much more direct connection. So I guess in short, my answer is yes, there is a connection, and yes, it's very complicated.
Um, if we have a moment for this, a last question from Avi Silver. He writes, in my experience, most Litvish people, meaning the the general group of people who are from Lithuania who uh, created a Orthodox movement to oppose Hasidism. Most Litvish people don't really want anything to do with the occult. They shrug it off as not applicable today, or they say there are better ways to spend their time, as opposed to Hasidic folk I speak with who welcome the discourse and love delving deeper. What do you think is the cause for this rift? And similarly, didn't one of the big rabbis back in the day get rid of all of the demons? Which I'm not sure what the reference is to that specifically. Although one thing I do want to add is one day I would love to have some Blygissen demonstrations on the roof of Der Nister, but I'm told I'm not allowed just yet. That's a separate question.
Okay, you'll have to invite me when that happens.
Yes.
I'll be in the audience. So I mean, there's a certain truth to what's being said about the belief in Dybbuks, and particularly the ability to exercise. I'll start over. There were many stories told about Hasidic rabbis and demon exorcisms, such that for Hasidic Jews, the rabbi's ability to exercise Dybbuks was often sort of was like a big thing, and it was not necessarily at all important to Litvish Jews to make the same claims about their rabbi's abilities. So in that sense, there is a stronger belief and Dybbuks and like among Hasidic Jews, certainly in Eastern Europe. However, there were a number of stories of Lithuanian rabbis who are conducting exorcisms. So they did it too. There's a story about the Chavetz Chaim in the Dybbuk, and who was a famous Lithuanian rabbi, and quite a few other Litvish rabbis who were involved in the sort of practices. So it's not such a hard and fast distinction. In terms of claiming about getting rid of all the demons, maybe reference is a claim by Maimonides, the Rambam, who was a famous rationalist, that demons no longer existed, which was obviously more comfortable for him to say. So, I mean but it is like a it's a classic sort of narrative of this theory of disenchantment from Weber, which I mentioned, to claim that once there were demons and now we've gotten rid of them all.
Wow, thank you again so much for that. This was, I think, a fantastic conversation, and there's so many more questions that I know that we wanted to have, but we didn't quite have time for. But again, thanks to everyone for joining us. As we kind of close things out, again, I wanted to thank you, Sam, for your time and again, your incredible research. It's really fun to always get to hear you speak. We'll be sending out an email to everybody tomorrow that's going to have this video along with some of the links and some of the things we talked about. I think we'll end with sharing the book that was Gewenemo Warsaw. And once there was Warsaw, will be shared. Sam, if there's some things you want to share with us, I'm happy to put that in the email because I would love to just continue seeing your work kind of grow and get out there. And again, thanks to our partners, Der Nister and the Southern California Arbitering Educational Center. And again, this is a continued part of our wonderful series on the Yiddish mysticism, Yiddish occult, and witchcraft. So we look forward to having you at our next event. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you very much.
Thank
Bye.
you.